Today on the Family Answer Man, we're answering your questions about affairs, infidelity, and marriage, and what can be done from a biblical worldview on the Family Answer Man program. This is David Orgis, and I am here with Dr. Mark Crosby, the Family Answer Man. Our time is designed to answer questions commonly asked in both the counseling and church settings, and our goal is to answer general questions from a biblical worldview through the lens of our collective years of experience and education to help you, our listeners, have a stronger, healthier, and happier family. Now, today we want to thank the incredible people at Days Smokehouse and Specialty Meats, located at 35770 LA Highway 16 in Denham Springs, and also the great people at Winter's Air, who are located in Denham Springs and service the Denham Springs and surrounding areas. Now, our show, The Family Answer Man, is not a therapy session, and this is not specific advice to your situation. Mental health is a very serious issue, can be, and often is very dynamic. So for in-depth answers to your questions, we encourage you to seek professional counsel specific to your unique circumstances. Now, we do hope that this episode of The Family Answer Man will be helpful for you and your family so that you can have a stronger, healthier, happier family. Well, Dr. Mark, we were talking about a big question today,
Yes.
a topic that most or many people have either experienced or been related to somebody that has experienced this,
Right.
whether it's family or friends, and been exposed to the issue of infidelity and affairs in marriages.
Yes.
Is this something that is more common now, or is this something that is just more talked about now in our society?
I think it's a little of both. I think, number one, years ago, of course, when there was an affair, everybody tried to keep it under wraps. It was hush-hush. We don't talk about it. And some even had the idea, especially, grandmothers, if we don't talk about it, it never happened.
Never happened, right? Yeah.
So there's that. But also, too, we're living in a culture and a society where, again, the topic of affairs, infidelity, human sexuality, broadening one's horizon, if you will, going against the norm, going against the cultural values and mores. These things are happening in our culture, and because they're happening, people are willing to explore and to go beyond their vows and go beyond the boundaries of marriage. And thus, affairs and infidelity then occurs.
Mm.
And though many will argue up front that, hey, we are in a unique time. This is the 21st century. We're no longer bound by some of the mores and values of yesteryear. They'll soon discover that an affair is as painful now as it was 50 years ago, 100 years ago, 1,000 years ago. It hurts. It brings a lot of embarrassment. It brings a lot of shame. It brings a lot of confusion to the children and to the rest of the family members. And so, again, it is a very painful and just life-changing experience that many people hope they never go through. But unfortunately, we are seeing it on the rise in our culture for those reasons and many others that were mentioned.
Yeah, you mentioned the time frames of, dating back to thousands of years ago. It's still incredibly painful for someone to go through this experience. And, a lot of times people will say that things like this, the marital vows and relationships and the values that we hold, especially as Christians, are archaic, right? But also, I think it's really important to point out that some of the truths that are there are just timeless. They're not archaic, they're timeless.
They're timeless. And these vows and these covenants that we make with our spouse, these are the very things that have held, Western civilization together, for thousands of years, if you will.
Yeah.
And so without them, the family begins to fall apart. What's happening is because we no longer respect the vows that we have made or the covenant that we're in, because that is becoming so rampant, we're seeing a breakdown in family. We're seeing a high rise in the mental health problems of children and teenagers. Mental illness is something that is just going through the roof among our adolescents. And the suicide rate is going through the roof. I read a stat just the other day that says there are more suicides in our nation than there are homicides.
Wow.
And so we're seeing this starting to happen. And I will argue that a lot of it has to do with our relationships or lack thereof, has a lot to do with how we treat our family members, our spouses, our children, and all that goes with that. And so again, the stronger your relationships are in your marriage and your family, with your children, with your parents, in many cases, the happier and more adjusted you're going to be. But if those things are broken down, if those things are non-existent, if those things are suffering, then so your mental health will suffer as well.
Yeah. Well, we are talking about relational issues and especially infidelity and affairs today on the Family Answer Man. If you have a question that you would like answered, we would love to do that. You can email us at familyanswerman@liveoak.church. Again, that's familyanswerman@liveoak.church. And the first question that we had for today, I'll go ahead and read it. It says this. It says, I recently discovered my husband had an affair, and he said he doesn't know why he did it. I don't know what to do. He fears going to therapy. Our house is in chaos. Our family is suffering. What can we do?
Wow. Well, first thing, again, unfortunately, affairs and infidelity have been with us, for thousands of years. As a matter of fact, one of the most infamous stories of the Bible is the story of David and Bathsheba. King David is the king of Israel. He is a man after God's own heart, but he has an affair with a friend of his, an officer in his army. He has an affair with his wife, Bathsheba. And again, many a pastor has preached on this, as to how this happened and why it happened. How did a man of God like King David, a man after God's own heart, get involved in such a, terrible situation? And number one, the first thing most pastors will say is he was not where he's supposed to be.
Yeah.
He's supposed to be leading his troops in battle, but he stays back home. Secondly, after the affair occurs, he then tries to cover it up. And in trying to cover it up, he makes things worse. And in making things worse, he destroys his family. And then later on, you read in Psalm 51, which is his confession of his sin, if you will, is that he has lost the joy. He has lost the very presence of God by getting involved in this affair. So again, affairs and infidelity, and this is the point, is something that can happen to anybody, and it has happened down through the ages, and no one's immune.
Yeah.
And so that's very important to note. And if you think you're immune, you have just set yourself up for failure. Okay. If you think you're not capable, if you think you're immune from such a thing, then you will, again, lower your boundaries, and then you will find yourself in a situation that could be very, very difficult for you and for others. So the question I often get is this. So why do people have affairs? And I think that was kind of written into this question. He doesn't know why he did this. So why do people have affairs? And why do people, get involved, especially when a person knows that this will cause pain and suffering? One of the first questions I get from the offended party is, what were they thinking? What was he thinking? What was she thinking? Why didn't they think about us? Why were they not thinking about the kids? And in many cases, they weren't thinking. So here's 6 primary reasons real quickly for affairs. And we've touched on these before, I believe. But number one, I will argue that some people have what's called an emotional connection. People allow themselves to become emotionally engaged with maybe a coworker or someone in their neighborhood or someone on their ball team. They share some common hopes and dreams. Maybe they share some common hurts and grief. I've had many a spouse say to me, well, what happened was, I was going through a difficult time, with my husband, and I talked to the guy that my kid was on the same baseball team with, and he was going through a difficult time with his wife, and we just kind of, cried on each other's shoulder. And before we knew it, we were sharing common interests. Before we knew it, we thought we'd just have coffee. Before we knew it, we were going to each other's homes. And so this emotional connection creates, if you will, this process to eventually a physical interaction. Secondly, addiction to physical intimacy. And I'm trying to keep this PG-13. So addiction to physical intimacy. What happens is that this becomes an addiction, becomes also an obsession. It begins in many cases, maybe as a teenager with magazines or with videos or with hotlines that leads to other avenues, if you will. And the addiction, however, is in the conquest. It's not so much, I just want to be physically intimate. It is the addictions to the conquest. It's to the addictions to that dopamine rush.
The rush.
That a person has. And dopamine, for our listeners who may not know, it's a neurotransmitter in the brain that gives us this sense of pleasure, excitement, feeling good.
Right, the feel-good hormone.
Exactly. Thirdly, very similar to what we said a while ago about King David, being at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong frame of mind. being at the wrong place, at the wrong time, with the wrong frame of mind. How many times have I heard someone say, maybe our listening audience has heard this as well, where a person says, hey, I was hurt by my spouse. And so I went down to the street and started crying on my neighbor's shoulder, and they consoled me. Before I knew it, we were becoming involved. Or I was lonely. My spouse works all the time, or he's never home, or she's always out, or she's got other interests, and I'm always lonely. And this person was showing me some attention. Or the one I hear really often is, yeah, I was on a business trip, got involved because I was intoxicated. The coworkers went back to the motel room. I stayed at the bar or whatever, got intoxicated. This person came on to me before I knew it. This was happening. As a matter of fact, unfortunately, there is a situation in our own community here in Baton Rouge of where something similar to that actually happened, making, international headlines.
Yeah.
About being at the wrong place, the wrong time, with the wrong frame of mind. Fourthly, revenge. People get involved in affairs because of revenge. You did something to hurt me. You rejected me. You think I'm unattractive, so I'll show you. And so there is this revenge. It says, hey, there's somebody out there that thinks I'm attractive. Somebody out there that thinks I'm interesting. Somebody out there who thinks I'm, funny. Somebody out there that respects what I do. And so what happens is they get involved with that person just to show themselves and to show their spouse, hey, I am not as bad as you say that I am. So that's called revenge. Number 5, those who have no moral restrictions, they're just very impulsive. In other words, they see nothing inherently wrong with an affair. They were raised up, maybe in a culture or in a home or without certain boundaries that, hey, this is no big deal. It's the friends with benefits mindset. It's just what people do. There's no moral restrictions. And so usually these people have a personality disorder. These are your borderlines. These are your narcissists in many cases. These are your antisocial, what we used to call the psychopath, where they have no real moral restriction, no real moral problem with doing something along these lines. Number 6, very similar. Some see this as a sport. Some see being involved in an affair, being involved with someone else's spouse as almost a sport. And they'll say this to me, I did it because I could. I did it because I could. The point is this, all of these are similar, but all these are different. And the reason why we have to understand the differences is because in therapy, you will treat them differently. If a person is the wrong place, the wrong time, and had the wrong, frame of mind, that's different than a person who's emotionally involved with someone they're working with.
Yeah.
And so you're going to treat what's going on a little bit differently.
So in order to get to the correct end point, you have to know where your starting point is.
Exactly. Why did this happen? What was going on that they felt like they had to have some sort of revenge?
Yeah.
Why is it they have no moral boundaries or restrictions in this area? What's going on there? So again, the question is, what do you do if your spouse cheats on you? And that's a big question.
It's a huge question.
That's I think written in this question here. What do you do if your spouse cheats on you? Number 1, and I hope people will hear what I'm saying. Number 1, this may sound very simple, elementary, but stay with me. Number 1, take a deep breath, process the event, write things down. Okay, here's what I mean by that. Take a deep breath, process the information you've received, write things down. Why? Because a violent reaction or a violent threat or doing something you may not be able to undo later may make things worse.
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I've seen so many people say, well, I'm going to go out there and I'm going to kill, or I'm going to shoot, or I'm going to do this, or I'm going to, burn up their car, or I'm going to whatever. I'm going to take the kids and run to, Alaska or whatever. And you're going, wait a minute. That's only going to make things worse. Take a deep breath, process what has happened. Don't do anything that you may not be able to undo later. But very quickly after number 1, number 2 is as soon as possible, talk to someone.
Okay.
As soon as possible.
Are you talking about just a friend? Are you talking about a professional?
All of the above.
Okay.
Okay. And what I mean by that is this. Number 1, preferably a professional. Talk to your pastor. Talk to your counselor. If you don't have a counselor, find one. Talk to your pastor, talk to your counselor, talk to a close friend, someone that you trust, that's a confidant. But talk to someone as soon as possible. In other words, don't be angry, don't be hurt, don't be depressed alone.
Mm.
Be cautious, however, about talking to family at first.
Okay.
The reason for that is your family will try to solve the problem that you're going through. They'll want to deal with your hurt and pain and not quite sure how to do it. And sometimes they'll make things worse.
Okay.
So again, I'm not saying you can't ever talk. I'm not saying that, but what I am saying is a pastor, a counselor, a close friend would be preferable. Let's put it that way. Thirdly, after the initial shock, speak to your spouse with a third party preferably.
Okay, great point.
Yeah.
Help unpack why.
And the reason for that is this, you need to have a pastor or counselor because there's still going to be a lot of emotion. There's still going to be a lot of pain. There's still going to be a lot of hurt. There's still going to be a lot of, just betrayal and all the things that you feel. And sometimes the pastor or the counselor, for a lack of a better word, will kind of help referee.
Yeah.
Will help moderate. Will help facilitate what's going on. Because if all you're doing is having this crazy yelling fest, which is understandable. I mean, you're hurting.
Completely.
Okay? Yeah. But if all you're doing is having this crazy yelling fest, then you're not going to get a whole lot said, a whole lot done. So again, if you're really wanting to speak to your spouse, make sure preferably you have a third party. But do this after the initial shock.
Yeah.
This is done after you have taken a breath, written it down, process it, talk to a friend, a counselor, a pastor. Then after the initial shock, you speak to your spouse, preferably with a third party. That could be a pastor, that could be a counselor, maybe even a trusted friend. While doing so, what you're doing in that, what's the goal in that meeting is try to discover where everyone is. Try to discover where everyone is. In other words, is your spouse who had the affair, are they in love with this other person? Is this an emotional connection? Or was this wrong place, wrong time, wrong frame of mind? Right. Or does this person have an addiction that they have never really worked through, owned up to, never really realized about themselves, but it is a full-blown addiction?
Well, it's similar to what you said about, getting to the root cause and figuring out why they did this. Right. Again, you got to figure out where each person is in order to be able to heal well and properly.
Exactly. So you're trying to discover where everyone is and then which reason fits your situation so you can begin to hopefully create and begin the healing process. Number 4, this is, again, for the person who has been the victim of an affair. Evaluate your options. Evaluate your plans. Look to see, is there remorse? Are there other events that are coming to light in this conversation? It may come out perhaps that this is the person's 4th affair. You just found out about it. It could be this person has maybe another family, another state. I've dealt with that before.
It sounds crazy, but yeah,
it happens. There may be other things that needs to be unpacked. It could be in some cases that this person, unfortunately, perhaps is getting involved with underage, minors. So my point is that evaluate your options, your plans. Is there remorse? And are there other events that are coming to light that we need to be mindful of? And 5thly, for the person who has been offended by an affair, seek God's will, seek God's word, and seek God's wisdom. This is a great time, if you will, and I say it in the sense of getting involved in the Psalms. The Psalms, people say, well, how do I know where to go in God's word when I'm going through an affair? Well, read the Psalms.
Yeah.
The Psalms is full of scenarios of people being hurt, of people being betrayed, of people leaning on God, of people, sensing the presence of God, or in some cases feeling God's a million miles away. But again, it begins to speak to where you are. For the offender, for the person who has offended, the person who's been involved in the affair. So if you're the one in the affair, number 1, the first thing you need to do is go to your counselor or go to your pastor or go to your close friend, unpack what you did and confess what you did. And the reason for that is the Bible says that we're called to confess our sins one to the other. So this is a time, a situation, a circumstance where you really need to confess what you've done. Listen to the voice of God and listen to what God's trying to say to you in this moment. Secondly, be open, be honest, be transparent. This is not the time to be secretive, to be denying, to be defensive, or to start blaming. That is going to be the knee-jerk reaction of 90% of most people who are involved in affairs, who cause the affair. They're going to be secretive. They're going to live in denial. They're going to be defensive, and they're going to start blaming. That's not the thing to do. That will only drive the nail into your coffin faster.
So if this is something that you have any remorse for at all,
Yes.
that's a recipe to
Yeah.
just absolutely sink the ship.
Be honest, be transparent. If not, if you're secretive, if you're in denial, if you're defensive, if you're blaming, you're going to drive the nail into your coffin faster. And so that's important to note. Thirdly, if the other person that you had the affair with is still in your life, if you want to save your marriage, then you must end it with that person without looking back.
Yeah.
No texts, no emails, no calls, no Facebook, no final, let me have a parting moment. No. You end it without looking back. That person must be poison to you and to your family. You must see them in that light. Otherwise, again, this thing will drag out and you will make things far worse than before.
And I know people usually will have a pushback. Well, I work with this person and I can't end it. Or
yeah.
I've seen people that have talked to their boss and said, hey, I need a transfer to a different department. I've got to, there has to be a change.
I need to transfer. I need to work in another area. I'll take a demotion. I will take a, cut in pay.
Yeah.
I'll work across town. I'll work where, but I can no longer work, 3 cubicles down from the person I just had an affair with.
Right.
And in most cases, as this becomes, known, most people in HR, most people who are in management will recognize, the repercussion of this in their business, and hopefully will make some adjustments.
Yeah.
Number 4, if you're keeping count, seek truth. Seek why you went down this path. If you're the person who did the offending, if you're the person caught up in the affair, you need to do some self-reflecting and ask yourself, why did you go down this path? What was happening inside of you? If you don't do that, there's a high probability you will do it again.
Yeah.
If you do not unpack this, if you do not have some self-analysis, if you do not begin to process where you were, why this happened, what's going on inside of you, then again, it's very probable you'll go down this path again.
And that's part of the reason why seeking professional help is so important, because a lot of times you end up in a situation like the person that was the question came from today. Well, I don't know why I did it.
I don't know why I did
right?
it. Yeah.
Having somebody to help guide you through that can help uncover and help you discover some of those answers.
And prevent it, hopefully, in the future.
Yeah.
Number 5, staying honest with others, yourself, and God. Staying honest with others and yourself and God as to what's going on here. So here's the big question people ask. After the affair, there's some things you must stop doing. I'm trying to go through these quickly, so for those who are listening, hang on. After the affair, there are some things you must stop doing. Number 1, stop avoiding the pain. Have your grief, have your pain. In other words, there are a lot of people who, again, want to pretend like this never happened. If we don't talk about it, it didn't happen. If I don't think about it, but you're going to have, again, pain.
Yeah.
And you need to have your pain, have your grief. Number 2, again, this is primarily for the person who offended and was involved in the affair. Don't minimize the pain or the hurt or the trauma that you caused. And don't minimize what you did to your spouse. That will only push you further apart. What I mean by that is this. I have heard people say, well, it was just one time, or that was a year ago, or, come on, it wasn't that big a deal. No. If you minimize their pain, you're going to push them further apart. Next, stop trying to control them. You cannot make someone get over it. And I hear that a lot. Just get over it. Come on, just get over it. That was, a month ago. Just get over it. No. You cannot control them. You cannot make someone just get over it. You cannot make someone to stop thinking about it. So stop trying to control them. You can't make someone forgive you. You can't make someone trust you. And I hear that one a lot. Hey, it's never going to happen again. Just trust me. Just trust me. Just no. You cannot make someone forgive you. You cannot make someone to trust you. You can't make someone to stop talking about it. So again, stop trying to control the other person. Fourthly, enter into a restorative mindset. In other words, both parties need to stop sulking and living under the blanket of shame. It happened. We hate that it happened. But if we're going to get better, we have to have a restorative mindset. And the point simply is this. If we're not careful, we get addicted, we get anchored to the victim mentality.
Mm.
We get anchored and we get addicted to the victim mentality. And this victim mentality keeps us from getting better and working on getting better. So this is very important to understand. Fifthly, and this is perhaps, in my opinion, the most important of all five of what to stop doing after the affair, stop the ambivalence weapon. Stop the ambivalence weapons. What's the ambivalence weapon? Well, it sounds like this. I want to save our marriage. Well, but I don't know. I'm not sure if I want to save it. I want to save it, but I'm not sure if I want to save it. Or maybe I do and maybe I don't. I don't know. I'm going to wait and see. Maybe I do, maybe I don't. Stop saying if you're in or out. Eventually, the point is this. After the affair, you're going to have to choose to either mend it or end it.
Yeah.
But limbo causes only more pain. Now, again, I'm not saying that you cannot process some things in the beginning and work through some things.
Right. There's going to be some time that's required.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But you have to get to the place in your marriage that says we're either going to mend this thing or end this thing, and then focus on one or the other. Knowing this, that recovery can happen if it's done right and if it's done well. There are two ingredients for hope. Number one, for the offended, work on the process of forgiving.
Okay.
If you've been offended, work on the process of forgiving. It is a process. It is a slow build. It takes a while, but it can happen if you have the proper therapy, the proper help, the proper mindset. Number two, for the offender, for the one who's been involved in the affair, you must have a humble heart. You don't justify, you don't excuse, you don't try to give reasons, you have a humble heart to get things better. So in closing, here's what we all need to know, especially our listening audience. Colossians 2:13 makes it very simple. Bear with one another and forgive one another. Now there's more in that verse, but that is the cornerstone of that verse. Bear with one another, forgive one another as Christ has forgiven us. So again, affairs are painful. It is not easy to recover, but you can, and people do, if you do the work, if you have the right attitude, if you follow these steps that we've declared here. And in many cases that I've seen, for those who've tried to improve and get past their affair, they will say, look, you know what? Our marriage is better now than before. And thank God for that. It didn't happen every time, but for those who put in the work, it can, and it does, and it will happen.
Well, there you go. You have it from the Family Answer Man. A lot of practical things to do, and hopefully some understanding. So maybe you or someone you know can put these things into practice. And we are praying for those whose marriages are in a similar situation to what we talked about today. But we do want to thank the incredible people at Winter's Air and Days Smokehouse and Specialty Meats again for underwriting today's show. And as a reminder, this is not a therapy session. This is not specific advice to your situation. Your mental health and your marriages are very serious and they're important, and family dynamics can be and often are very complicated. So for in-depth answers to your questions and your situations, we encourage you to seek professional counsel specific to your unique circumstances. But on the Family Answer Man, we do want to be here for you. We want you to know that we pray for you, and we hope that this episode of the Family Answer Man has encouraged you and inspired you to make changes that will lead to a stronger, healthier, happier family.